Hello and welcome to the Permaculture Vine podcast, where we talk about permaculture, people and projects. I'm your host, Cormac Harkin, and today we have Neal Hegarty with us. Welcome, Neal.
It's a pleasure to be here, Cormac. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
You're very welcome. So, do you want to just give us a quick 30-second introduction, please?
Yeah. So I live in Guatemala. I'm from County Cork, actually, but I've lived in Guatemala for full time since 2012. I came here first in 2008, and in 2017 I moved to this lovely place in Lake Atitlan called Sunurna, and we started a farm to table restaurant here, and we also have a permaculture design and consultancy firm where we help people get homesteads, farms, and eco communities off the ground using a combination of education, design, and coaching, actually.
Right. So, do you want to just take us back to the start, where you discovered permaculture?
Yeah. So it's a long story, but I'll try and get through it quickly. So when I was 28, I was actually working in the pharmaceutical industry, more or less. I was working for a company that did filtration and water remediation systems and things like that for big pharma and food and bev. I traveled for a few years and done a lot of kind of construction and landscaping work. And now I was kind of like settling into the corporate world and all of that. And I was like really not excited about it, kind of panicking. Luckily for me, really, it was actually a big blessing. The 2008 crash hit and I got let go. And I just decided I wanted to do something different. So I decided I had this kind of romantic idea about going out and doing volunteer work in a third world country. So I applied to an NGO or to a nonprofit, and they sent me out to Guatemala to help out on a project. And I got sent out to this really rural part of Guatemala. I'd never been here. I didn't know anything about the country or the context or the history. And I got sort of sent out to this really rural town where really people were putting their lives back together following a very, very brutal and prolonged armed conflict, civil war. And so I was kind of thrown into the middle of all this, no context, no understanding, but I really felt a connection to the people and to the place. And I very quickly also started to see that a lot of the NGO stuff was actually not helping at all. In fact, a lot of it, I was like, is actually making stuff worse. And somewhere in that first year, I went to like a conference that someone was giving on agroecology, which is basically permaculture. And I was just like, this answers so many questions, because what the guy was talking about is a Colombian guy that gave the conference. He was talking about using permaculture and agroecology to rebuild communities and to develop kind of sovereignty and to get these poor countries out of kind of producing cash crops that are made valuable in Europe, right? And before I came here, what I really didn't understand was that so much of the poverty in these resource-rich countries has to do with these kind of like extractive practices where we take, they grow our sugarcane, our coffee, our cacao, and we being like the West, sort of add value to all those products. But people are like stuck working as kind of peasant farmers, and that's been a system that was implemented maybe 400 or 500 years ago that in a sense never really changed. And it also was at the roots of the armed conflict that took place here, that took so many lives as well. So when I kind of started to see and understand all this, and then I also started to see that a lot of the NGOs were doing so-called development work, but they were really just giving people more, coffee and cacao to plant so that Nescafe could keep having a line of cheap coffee. And so I went through a very kind of cynical phase around all this. And then I found this solution, which was all about like diversifying landscapes, going back to kind of like more pre-industrial indigenous farming techniques, and growing food in a way that like made sense to the ecology, but then also made sense to like that could like lift up communities. So I ended up going back home for a while, and I did a master's actually in sustainable development with Kimmage Development Studies College. I came back out then to Guatemala to write my thesis. Uh, as a topic for my thesis, I picked the relationship between permaculture and indigenous land management techniques. So I got very into and fascinated the by learning from indigenous communities that were. I found a bunch of indigenous communities where they were using permaculture and agroecology and kind of combining it with, what their ancestors had always done. So I really spent quite a few years living almost like a peasant farmer, basically, and really going back to just the earth and learning from people, because I really didn't like the idea of coming in as like the white savior expert. I wanted like to actually be out in the fields with the farmers and learning from them. So I did that for quite a few years, and I was pretty sure back then, especially when I did the masters, that I wanted to pursue a career in development work. And then slowly what I started to see was that a lot of the techniques and a lot of the approaches that the nonprofits and these kind of grassroots organizations were applying were actually not working in the long term. And I started to realize that there was all these other reasons, kind of socioeconomic reasons. Largely, I started to realize that indigenous peasant farmers, even though it sounds really romantic for them to kind of go back and detach from the capitalist system and to go into growing their own food, that it wasn't what they wanted. They wanted to leave agriculture. And then I was sort of seeing that like the people I really saw having a big impact and really kind of moving the needle were more taking like an entrepreneurial route and were showing that like permaculture could actually make money. And so that's what prompted me and inspired me with my business partner Jeremy Fellows and my now wife Adriana Urueta Cortez to move to this area where we just saw an opportunity. We found this beautiful town in Sununal, Lake Atitlan. It's got a lovely view of the lake. It's got a great climate. It's got water year round, and we were like, let's buy a piece of land and actually get a permaculture farm and business off the ground. So that's what then prompted us to start with Granja Siquin is the name of our farm. Looking back, it was like a horrible name to pick, but I like it. Granja means farm, and Siquin is one of the Mayan Nahuales. So it's one of the Mayan energies that I studied a lot when I was kind of in this phase. There's the Mayans had a very complex, or still have a very complex calendar, and they have 20 energies that kind of rotate through, and each one of them has like a different animal that symbolizes that day. Anyway, Siquin is it's the sign of abundance, and it symbolizes the bird. And so our kind of mission when we started this farm was to farm in a way that would bring abundance to our community, and also that would be good for the local bird population. So on our sign at our outside our farm, there's a picture of a little bird. And so we figured out pretty quickly that the best way to actually make this work was to start a restaurant. So we got into the whole kind of like farm to table restaurant, growing food and then serving it on plates. Little by little, we grew that business, but it was never like enough to really like, it was never enough. We got to the point where it was like sustainable and we could build a team and pay some workers. But what we really focused on in those early years was building and landscaping for other people. So a lot of people started to move here, like expats and people from Guatemala City. They started to see the potential, especially after COVID, but even before that. And so we just sort of started designing houses and landscapes. My wife is a graphic designer and a kind of a self-taught architect. I've built and landscaped kind of all my life, as has my business partner Jeremy. So we had a kind of a lot of experience, and we just started to help people to find land that, met their needs, help them to map it out and design it, and then like do the building for them. And it it took a while, but little by little, we just kind of established a building style and a landscaping style that just works for this climate. I'm a big believer that like natural building is all about building with the materials that you have on hand, and that kind of like permaculture landscaping, there's no real formula for it. Again, it's about like using the materials and the plants that just like want to grow in that area. Um, and it it took this really unexpected turn because just basically everyone we worked with wanted to have food forests. They wanted to have, small animals and chickens and composting systems. And so over the next sort of 7 or 8 years, we transformed about 20 acres of this landscape into edible permaculture food forests. We got our own farm off the ground. Our farm and our restaurant kind of became like the community hangout spot. We do open mic here every week. Then lots of our friends, people that we like kind of helped, sometimes on a form professional basis, sometimes on just a kind of gift economy style basis, set up amazing projects. Like our friend Julia set up a project called Casa Curativa, where they have a big food forest, and they have an apothecary, so they make all their own medicine. Our neighbors right here across the road from our restaurant have a food fermentation lab where they take a lot of the food and they ferment it. They make sauerkraut, they make kombucha, they make Jun. With another friend of mine lives across the road. He's an engineer. I helped him a little bit with his initial design, and then he was like, "Holy shit, the river's right here. I'm going to build a hydro." He built like a mini hydro. So little by little, we're taking those steps kind of as a community and as a group of friends towards like full autonomy. And it's just been amazing to kind of see what happens. There's been a huge amount of like ups and downs and trials and tribulations along the road, but we're little by little kind of like finding what works and finding a way of making it work. And now we're also really inspired to help other people to develop similar systems and businesses so that they can kind of replicate what we've got going on here.
Wow, that's quite the journey, quite the story. I don't know where to begin with it. So I'll probably take it back to the masters in sustainability, and basically what you found in particular was wrong with the NGO non-profit, what they were doing.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a good question. So there's this whole kind of belief system in a lot of the sustainable development stuff that quite simplistic. The view as it's talked about is that the indigenous people in countries like Guatemala used to be living in paradise in complete harmony with nature, and then the colonizers came over and enslaved them and exploited them, which is true, and that now they're victims of the capitalist system which is exploiting them, which is also true to some extent. And that the solution to this is for them to go back to farming in this kind of like permaculture way, where they, instead of growing cash crops for export, grow, a diverse mix of crops like we do here at our farm. And all of that sounds great, except when you actually talk to indigenous peasant farmers, they don't want to go back to being subsistence farmers. They want to send their kids to college. They're more likely these days to actually want to go and like drive an Uber in the city than stay and tend to their crops. Because there's also a misconception about permaculture, which is like, oh, you're just going to like create this ecosystem and it's going to feed you and all you have to do is go out and harvest it. That is like absolutely not true. There's a lot of maintenance required to keep permaculture systems productive, especially in the tropics, because things desperately want to go back to like that, what we call like late succession. And with the agroforestry and the forest garden systems, through pruning, we're always trying to keep things in mid succession where they're at their most productive point. But like just that is a lot of work, and so and people didn't want to do it. And then so these are the types of like things that we would happen in reality, right? Like we'd go out, we'd help a family to turn their corn plantation or their coffee plantation monoculture into a diverse food forest. And it would look great when we did it. We'd take loads of photos. The sponsors would be happy. The donors would be happy. Then we'd come back a year later, and the family would have, the oldest kid would have got married and needed a place to live. So he would have built his house slap bang in the middle of the beautiful food forest. And then I would talk to them and be like, are you guys actually like harvesting this? And they're like, we're pretty busy. And it's actually cheaper just to like, it makes more sense for us just to like work in, a construction and in the nearby town, and then like buy cheap rice and beans on the way home than it does to be out here all day. Like, and I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense actually. And so there was just this disconnect between like what the story that the nonprofits were telling in order to like get funding and the reality of what people want. And it really took me down this whole rabbit hole, in a sense, Cormac, of looking at, the reality of things for, as it actually works versus what you kind of learn in the permaculture books. So another thing that started to happen, what I didn't talk about was like finally at the end of my story, like about 3 years ago, when we were, building our eco community and doing all these projects, I was shattered. I was exhausted because I basically built a business where I was at the center of everything. I had 150 employees. They were working on all these different building and landscaping projects. I was completely exhausted, and I was spending all of my time doing like admin and budgeting and people management, and I hated it. And then I basically like hired a business coach and really did a kind of audit of my life, and I realized that I was doing things completely wrong. And what I really wanted to be doing was like designing things and solving real problems for people and helping them like to actually implement permaculture. And instead, because of the way I structured my business and my organization, I was just like managing people and doing accounts all the time. So we completely reinvented the way we did business about 3 years ago, and I got much more into working only as a designer and a consultant and a coach, basically. And that took me in a really interesting direction where I started to work a lot more using our farm and the community we have here as kind of a portfolio and a proof of concept. A lot of Guatemalan farmers started to kind of contact me, and it was an extension of what I'd seen in the NGO world, and I'd been putting the pieces together little by little. And what I started to see was you have all these farms now in Guatemala where they're extensive, big areas of like hillsides that are planted with things like coffee, cacao, sugarcane, bananas. And so, and here's what I learned, right? Per square meter, the tropics can produce way more food than what you can produce in a square meter in a temperate climate, right? But because there's so much water, and because there's so much more water, there's so much more sunlight, and there's so much more like natural diversity. But you can't mechanize anything here. So the inputs to outputs are the inputs required for the outputs that you can potentially obtain in the tropics are much higher. And the way that's always been addressed is through this kind of massive free pool of basically free or slave labor that you've always had in these countries. And it really took me years to understand this, and why it's going to continue to be something that we really need to take seriously as as a species. And so what I mean by that is, like, imagine, say, an agroforestry system where you've got, let's say, the typical thing here would be you've got like coffee, bananas, and some kind of shade tree growing across a couple of hundred acres, versus like a couple of hundred acres of grass with paddocks and electric fencing in Ireland, right? Potentially what the coffee farm can produce per square meter in terms of calories is way higher, but the inputs are off the chart, because in Ireland, the farmer just needs to open the gate, let the cows into a paddock, they go along, they eat all the grass, they turn it into milk, and he just brings them to the milking parlor in the morning and the evening, and like everything gets done for him. In a climate like this, the system, because things grow so quickly, it's constantly trying to go back to being a multi-level forest, right? So you come in, and if you leave the coffee trees for a couple of months in rainy season, you'll come back and they'll just be covered with vines, right? Things grow so unbelievably fast. And the way people have always gotten around that is they go in by hand and they chop back the understory with a machete, literally by hand. It's the only way to do it, because if you've ever seen one of these kind of like agroforestry systems, there's no other way of managing it other than by hand. The same with picking it, the same with pruning it. And that's basically the same for every type of major agricultural endeavor in this country. Sugarcane, rubber, like Guatemala and countries like this produce tons of rubber. You literally need to go and hand cut each tree and put a little, in a quite a skillful way, and put a little collection, like metal cup tied onto the tree. Cacao, sugarcane, banana, all of these like things that we in the West consume in massive amounts, they are all done by hand. And the way agriculture has always worked here, what used to happen is these big farmers, they would just let the local community live on their farm and farm it. So they would give them, 20 acres out of the 1,000 acres that they owned to grow their crops on. And then they would, in return for that, go out and do the harvesting and the pruning and the cleaning. But now these countries are modernizing super fast, so nobody does that anymore, right? And you have to pay for it. And then you're getting these kind of permaculture guys who, I was probably like this like 15 years ago, kind of coming in and being like, oh, you need to diversify. A really common practice here, for example, is like people spray herbicide all over the ground. So they spray herbicide underneath the trees to stop the undergrowth coming up and strangling the trees. And the permaculture guys will come in and be like, you got to stop doing that. Don't you know you're killing your soil biome? You got to do all that. You got to chop and drop, they say here. But I started to see when I really went in and looked at these farms, and like, because I had spent those years also working with peasant farmers, like, and actually doing this, I knew how labor intensive it was. And then I was listening to people being like, no, you've no idea. Like, I'm struggling. I can't pay, because these guys are also competing with China and Brazil and places where there's even cheaper labor, et cetera, et cetera. And it's kind of like, it's really like a race to the bottom. And so the ecological practices like diversification, all the syntropic stuff that people think is like, there's all these guys now on Instagram and YouTube being like, syntropy, it's the future. You plant really densely and put everything close together, and then you chop it back, and you let it fall on the ground. And it's like that is described to a T in the Permaculture Designer's Manual from 1978. Like, there's nothing really new coming out now that wasn't understood back in the 70s and even before that. The problem is how to actually do it in a sustainable way. So the problem you have here is you have big landowners who can't afford to pay for the labor of it because they're not making enough money. And then you have small peasant farmers who have small pieces of land, and they are trying to get out of agriculture, not do more and grow their own food. So this was the kind of stuff that I started to really look at, and I started to really take seriously. And there's there's a phrase in permaculture design, in the permaculture design manual, which is like, the problem is the solution. So when it comes to building businesses, and I just think that I think we're in this phase now in the world where we have phenomenal opportunities, because this is going to be the fix dealing with problems like this. If people can come up with solutions, it is the fastest growing industry in the world, but you won't find the solutions in a book. The books tend to talk only about techniques, and what we need now is actual like consultants who are capable of looking at things with a degree of nuance, and who are actually able to work with farmers to create a kind of a roadmap and a path out of where they are now and into where they're going to get to, and to like plot a course. So that's very much what we've started focusing on now.
Yeah. Well, I hope I'm ready in this fastest growing market. I hope to be ready when it picks up. And we get the fixing the mess that's been made. And tackling these problems. Uh, so your farm to fork restaurant. So you mentioned about business a lot there. So I think you're able to provide a lot of value in that. So do you want to tell us how your farm to farm restaurant got started, and how you've made that profitable?
Yeah. So that and here that so what I've basically been talking about are is problems, and then by the reason we started this project was, I was like, there has to be a solution. I didn't quite know what it was, and I thought it would be easier to find it than it was. But the solution we found was, if you're going to diversify a farm and you're going to do this kind of permaculture style of farming, it makes a lot more sense to go really in the direction of value adding, and the way we do that is through our restaurant. So we grow like a big variety of crops. So we grow like, we have a greenhouse where we grow kind of cherry tomatoes and peppers. We have about a half an acre of like market garden style stuff where we mostly grow like salads, which we sell actually. So we sell our salads. We keep we have quite a bit of the farm under food forest, where we rotate our chickens, right? So that was one of my kind of like aha moments. I was like, food forests are cool, and you can have like 8 or 6 different types of fruit trees growing, plus a bunch of medicinal herbs, plus all this other stuff, and it's super biodiverse, and it captures lots of water, and it does photosynthesis. It's very hard to live on it. What we started doing was, and my good friend Shad Goodsey was the first person I saw really doing this properly, and I learned it from him, and then we kind of like took it and tweaked it. We put little chicken houses in the middle of our food forest, and we put 3 or 4 doors on them, and then we fence in the food forest, and we rotate them around the same way a dairy farmer would do that. So that's kind of getting that set up, A, to be productive, and then B, to set up a restaurant where we add value to all that food. So we keep our menu pretty simple. We kind of do like breakfast of the day, lunch of the day, dinner of the day, and we'll typically take like a bunch of stuff that's growing and we'll just like wang it in a pot. We do a lot of things like, chicken soups and stews and curries. And then we also have a few favorites on our menu. And this was the other kind of like aha moment I had eventually. Really, a lot of my learning comes down to this: stop trying to do everything yourself. So, and get very good at making irresistible offers. So what I mean by that is, I very quickly realized that it made more sense for us to focus on having a few things. So chickens for eggs, chickens for meat, salad greens, and then we have a kitchen garden where we grow a lot of things that just go on our plates that we don't try and sell. And that's what we sell. But then a lot of the people that we work with through our consulting company, our coffee from a local cooperative that we collaborate with. A really good friend of mine roasts the coffee. We get our cacao from, we have a couple of different suppliers of cacao, and then we've we've helped a couple of different organizations get like organic vegetable growing operations up off the ground. So what I found is that like you can sell a lot more when the wagon is full. So in the early days, we were kind of tended to be struggling. We would like always be running out of food. And, and then I was like, okay, fuck this. We're trying to grow too many things. I'm going to focus on, these 4 or 5 things. And then I'm going to find good suppliers for all of the other things that we need. And then, like I say, little by little, increasing the kind of dining experience, the quality of the dining experience. So we make a lot of like green juices, green smoothies, different things like that, where we're like adding value to the stuff that's growing in the garden, and just really making a lot of medicine basically. And then, like I say, we're lucky enough to be next door to Love Probiotics, where they do all this like incredible food fermentation. So we put a lot of their stuff on our menu and in our store. Our friend, like I said, Julia Bentley down the road, she has a medicinal apothecary, so we put her products on our store. So we're kind of, now we've got this kind of like really nice space surrounded by permaculture gardens where people can come in, they can get a really nice meal, and then they can leave with sort of everything they need. Like they can leave with their groceries for the week, basically. So, and then the reason that it helps with the offer I'm able to make my clients is when I start working with people, I'm able to be like, listen, we can start by doing a sort of site analysis and an analysis of what you've currently got going on. And then I can help you. And this is where business wise, I kind of think I set myself apart from the other permaculture designers, because instead of trying to give people work, I try to make them money. So typically what I'll do with people is I'll say, listen,
Yeah.
there's a lot of initiatives that we've pioneered over the years using animals, and we can help you set one of those up so that you actually have a positive cash flow on your farm. And when you're actually producing enough to sell, we can help to sell your stuff, and I can also connect you to 3 or 4 other people I know who are doing distribution of organic food. So a lot of our business has focused on building up a kind of an ecosystem or a network of people who care about this stuff, right? So for example, one of my really good friends, Michelle Sultan, she started an online supermarket here in Guatemala. So a lot of my former clients, I'm like, Michelle, these guys are set up, they're up and running, they're doing grass-fed beef. Here you go. And she's like, great, I need more of that. Boom. So we try to go all the way to connecting our clients to market. And we also help them to get grants, because we've just realized like how, in a sense, like anyone, it takes about 2 or 3 weeks of studying permaculture to sort of be able to do a design and be like, look at this design I did. There's agroforestry over here, and there's ponds over here, and there's this over here, and blah, blah, blah. It's a whole other, and don't get me wrong, that's a great thing to learn how to do. But really where I found the important work comes in is like being able to help your client come up with a strategy and a roadmap for how to get there.
We'll touch on that more in a second, but I have a few things here. Sorry if I'm distracted. There's a 3-month-old puppy kicking about. So if you think I'm not listening, in the audience as well, that's why I'm moving all over the place. I like the value add. So for anybody who doesn't know value adds, like if I grow apples, well, I make cider, sell the cider, things like that. Just processing your products a bit more and then selling them for a higher value. You mentioned Chad there. Chad's responsible for my deep bedding chicken method that I use here. His video, and it's mad the coincidence that you live beside him. It's one of my favorite videos, and I always send it to clients when I'm telling them about deep bedded chicken method. He sketches about the concrete. No, I'll put it in the link below in the description.
Do and I'm just finished recording. I just finished recording because we do a free farm tour here every week, and eventually I was just like, okay, I got to record that. So I just finished recording with a videographer. We did a full video tour of our farm where we also have deep bedding chicken houses, and we also have these different systems with chickens in the food forest. And then we also did a full tour of Sunurna, the place where we live, showing all the different kind of permaculture projects that we've helped to get up and running over the years. So we're going to put that on that's going to go up on our YouTube channel. So I'll send you a link to that as well. Because these systems, they really are incredibly simple to set up. And once you see them, it really does make you wonder like what people are doing with conventional farming in a sense.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure about the farming, but I liked it because in an urban area where I am, limited space, I was able to provide the chickens a happy life, and there's no smell because the
There's
wood
no
chips.
there's no smell, and what it allows you to do is essentially farm vertically. So what I mean by that is most people kind of like, people always ask me, oh, how many chickens can you keep per square meter? And I'm like, it depends entirely, if you want the chickens to be healthy and happy, how many, what the bug count is in that square meterage. So if you have like, if you have an area of like 100 square meters, but it's 4 meters high with decaying organic matter, you can keep a lot more chickens in that than the equivalent size where it's just uh, like a cement floor or something, right? So
Yeah, well,
um,
I actually had mine was on a concrete floor, and then 6 to 12 inches of wood chips, and then what I would do then is every once a month I would go out and pile it up in the corner, and then they would flatten it out. So I always kept make sure they were entertained, and as long as they were working and had a job, they were happy. No, I didn't. I think I had three in total, in like geez, must have been like 60 square feet, massive space for them. But again, I used to I put branches, sort of hung branches up so they could jump about and they could just entertain them basically.
yeah.
Um,
We're doing a bunch of different ones now. I'm doing one down in my neighbor's place. That's the really nice thing about having the community, is that we have a cooperative now. So quite a few of us now have chickens, and we have different versions of that. But one of my clients, she has there's a couple of different ways to approach it, right? You can do the rotated yard if you have flat space and you have a food forest, so you can send them into a different yard every day. Or what this one friend of mine is doing is, she just has one yard, but we made a bunch of holes to do what we call banana circles. So we dug out a bunch of holes and we filled up the holes with hay bales and prunings from her trees. So each hole is about like, you know, 1 meter down, and then the pile goes 1 meter up. And so what we're going to do there is, every day she has 7 different big, huge compost piles, and every day we take the plastic tarp off a different one. So instead of sending them to a different paddock every day, you're just giving them access to a different compost pile every day, right? So there's a lot you can do with with chickens, really. Um, we've also been helping a lot of our clients to do the Joel Salatin inspired pasture fed poultry system, where you do movable houses. So we have a few clients who were like grazing cattle, and they were like, same problem. They were like, yeah, fucking, love your ideas, really want to plant trees, got no cash. So what we did with them was we built these movable houses, and they move the chickens for the broil. They move like, yeah, movable houses with broiler hens, and they move them 2 days behind the cattle, and they love it. They go out, and I mean, things like that, like free range chicken and free range eggs, they just sell. And what we found is that by there's nothing wrong, I think, with starting with, you know, making housing that's adequate for them, you know, doing it as well as you can, and buying your feed. Because again, once you have like a bit of a cash flow and you're actually selling some food, then you can slowly start to like breed insects and get more compost and ferment their food. And we started growing a zola for our chickens. So this like in our ponds, we start to reproduce this algae that's like super protein dense. We started to little by little find the plants that they like the most and plant those in the food forest under the fruit trees. So little by little, we're bringing down our grain input, and the goal is to get like, over the next few years, to get like 100% grain free through composting, growing algae, doing these different things. But I think there's nothing wrong with like using the feed that's available now to like get there little by little.
Yeah, don't be a purist.
Yeah, don't be a purist. Don't be a purist. They rarely get anywhere,
Yeah, and another one I like from a former guest on here. He basically said, be pragmatic, use what's available. If you start off and say, I'm going to save the world, I'm going to use all, no, everything's going to be 100%. Well, you'll never get there. You have to use what's available. And then once you get there, you can start swapping stuff out.
Yeah, it's like, it's kind of like this. It's like, I think I got that from Jeff Lawton, right? It's like, or maybe it was Sepp Holzer. It's like, use the cheap energy we have now, so that in like 10 or 15 years, we don't need that cheap energy. So there's nothing wrong with coming in and being like, okay, I'm going to use a machine to dig out a bunch of ponds and plant a bunch of trees. So now I'm going to have like a load of, 10 years later, I'm going to have a load of biomass on my farm, and I'm not going to need to bring in grain to feed my animals, because I'm going to have all this biomass growing right here. But like in the meantime, I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I can still buy like a sack of feed, and I can still get the gasoline in to power a digger, because we don't know what the energy situation is going to be like in 10 years. So I'd much rather use that cheap energy now to build something regenerative than just kind of like keep pissing it away and do nothing.
Right, with 15 minutes about, so the offer, I'm going to try and squeeze a wee sneaky consult out of here, wee money consult. So you mentioned offers. So like the likes of myself, I'm just sort of starting out. I've just lost my first client. I've got them and lost them. It was some communication errors, mistakes I made, which it wasn't a waste of time because I've learned a lot from it. So basically, what I'm looking to offer is consultations here in Ireland, and then designs and installs. But work with a partner, a landscaper, that they'll do all the things like shades, paving, pathways, and then I'll go on in and do the planting. So offers. How would I basically set up that offer?
Yeah. So this is exactly what I want to work on for the next few years, right? Because, and congratulations, by the way, because you're already a step ahead of where I was when I started, right? Because you already have figured out the part that it's better to collaborate with an existing service provider. Like, I didn't even understand that. I went straight into doing all the service provision myself. So what there's really there's sort of three things I think that everyone who wants to be an entrepreneur should understand. The first one is, what's the profile of client that you want to work with, right? And be as niche as possible. So do you want to work with homesteaders? Do you want to work with farmers? Do you want to work with schools? Do you want to work with like prisons. You know, there's literally there's lots of different niches, but kind of picking, it's like, okay, I want to work with this, not even demographic but psychographic, like I want to understand the psychological situation that they're in, right? So that's why, you know, these days in Guatemala, I work with landowners, I work with farmers, and I understand intimately their pain points, right? I understand that they're suffering because labor is getting more scarce. I understand that they're suffering because prices are plummeting for things like, you know, for things like the cash crops that they've always traditionally owned. I understand all these others. I have a whole page at home of like the different pain points I've heard. So first thing is like, who do you want to work with? What are they going through? What are they struggling with? Right. So that would be, you know, with this client that we're talking about here, who are they, and what are they going through?
Yeah, so I would have to find out then basically who my demographic is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
You're
I was thinking, so because I don't know anything about farming, and for me to go on and start to tell a farmer, oh, I read this in the book, would be just daft. So,
especially an Irish farmer, like yeah, yeah,
and especially up north, all the Protestant farmers up here, they're having none of
yeah,
it. Uh,
yeah. And tell him
uh,
tell him you're working with a lad from Cork, and then just really seal the
hello,
deal.
my name's Cormac. It'll be shot. So I'm focused on gardens, people with a quarter acre, um, who are looking for a nice garden, like ornamental edibles. I think they call them edimentals. I read the other day. So that's what I'm thinking. That's a value I can provide. It's what I hope will be showcasing here at my own property. So front garden, food forest front garden still looks nice, and then the back garden, it's really landscaped well, using value in the edges. So having composting systems, chickens along the edges, so you still have that like manicured. I still have paving out the back. I still have grass. So
Right.
it's open space so the kids can play, and it's not like packed full of plants.
Yeah. Okay. So we're on to something, but your messaging is a little unclear, right? So right. So this is great. This is because this is exactly what we do. By the way, this is
Yeah.
we our my main goal in life at this point is, as well as working with Guatemalan farmers, is to work with people like you, Cormac, who have, I think, what it takes to set up profitable permaculture design businesses in wherever you are, because they're an extremely, I think, effective way of slowly building regenerative communities, right? So, okay, you mentioned a bunch of things, right? So, typical fears that your clients are likely to have, right? It's like they think permaculture is going to be ugly and messy. They think that it's going to be like, you know, that there's some sort of sacrifice between aesthetics and um, and 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 food growing. They probably feel totally intimidated about growing food because they've never done it. They Right, we could go on and on here, right? They probably feel like it's going to be loads of maintenance to keep up with it. Um, they probably, you know, on some level, they might feel like they're going to stand out and be the odd ones out in their community, et cetera, et cetera, right? So you can, what you want to do is you want to have a very clear, concise mission statement that speaks to those pain points and directs them to a very clear outcome that they will get when they work with you, right? So something like, hi, I'm Cormac Harkin. I work with landowners to create beautiful food producing ecosystems which look amazing address climate change, and help you to grow, you know, up to 50% of your family's food. And then typic, typically something like, without you needing to like spend all your time out digging in the dirt, blah blah blah. So that's kind of like the first step, is like developing that real clarity around what you do. And believe it or not, that just makes like a massive difference, because you'll start, once you're clear on that, you'll start to get so many clients just from like bumping into people in a coffee shop. It's like, oh sorry, oh yeah, hi, what's your name? What do you do? It's like, oh, I'm Cormac. I help people build beautiful food producing ecosystems on their lawn. Oh, right. As opposed to, I value the edges, and like
Yeah.
right. So
Uh,
getting that kind of clarity first, then once you have that, having a sort of a value ladder. So it's like, oh, that sounds interesting, Cormac. How does that work? And it's like, well, what I typically do first is I could go out and just check your site out and see if it's even adequate. And I don't charge anything for that. Oh, well, that's amazing. Do you want to come out tomorrow? Right? It's like, sure, I'd love to. Then once you're there, you're like, and this is typically what I'll do. I'll say, listen, the first stage in my process is to engage in a visioning session where I really get to know and understand what you would like out of this space, because it's not my space, so I can only design it if I really understand your dreams, your wants, how much time you're planning on spending here. Do you want to design it so that you're spending 5 or 6 hours a week with your kids in the garden, or do you want to design it so that you don't have to do anything, or et cetera, et cetera? Do you want it to be more food producing? Do you want it to be more beautiful? Blah blah blah. So we're going to engage in a visioning session, and then I'm going to carry out a very thorough site analysis, right? And that's typically where I'll take out my phone or my tablet and I'll show them all these amazing maps that we do, where we map out the path of the sun, the prevailing winds. We explain their climate to them. And then I will typically say, the reason we do that is that the best design is always the convergence of well-expressed goals and a thorough site analysis. At the end of this process, I'm just going to give you a report where I'll give you all the maps to scale, and I'll explain how feasible it is to take, to take your vision and make it happen. And I'll recommend some next steps for you. And then if that's a good fit, and I'll charge I'll typically charge like 1,500 euros for just that. Then if they're into that, I'll say, okay, well, the next thing we can do is we can do a schematic design where we basically take this map and we sit down and we just use some symbols and move them around the map. And we say maybe your pond could go here, and your chicken house could go here, and your food forest could go here, and I'd recommend doing a grey water garden over here, and blah blah blah. And we'll sit down and we'll do a couple of brainstorming sessions. And once we have a concept that you're agreed on, I'll take it and I'll turn it into a thorough schematic design that's done in layers, where we do our water and access layer first, our vegetation layer second, our structures layer third, following the scale of permanence. And I will give you a cost for implementation, which you'll get from your neighbor. And I'll also help you to break that up into segments. And then even though someone else will do it, I will come, once a week and meet with you and make sure it's going to plan. And I'll also explain and teach you everything you need to know so that you fully understand this, right? And then some sort of and I'm super excited about this because I'm also working with my friend Amelda, starting to what you want to then eventually start doing is building up your own ecosystem of my friend has a juice bar actually, and she's sourcing a lot of her spinach from gardens like this, so I can hook you up with her, blah blah blah. Or my other friend is making apple cider vinegar, because so a lot of the problems I talked about earlier, and the reason I'm so excited about this is that if you really look at it, it's like, oh, the extensive model of doing agriculture across huge areas. In the West, it requires a lot of energy and petrol. And in the global South, it requires a lot of manpower. And both of those things are going to get more and more scarce. So the only really sensible solution is to take our farms and really diversify them, because the kind of intensive but not extensive model where we have like food forests and forest gardens, they can produce way more food per square meter, but we need those systems to be close to where we live. And so what's happened here in our community, and it's something that I really think can happen all over the world, is that instead of having like one farm that feeds the whole community, we can have like hundreds of mini farms that are actually collaborating together, and we can have other people working on value adding and juicing and farm to fork and apple cider vinegar and all of those kinds of things. So, but you want to start like little by little. So does that help?
Yeah, it helps a lot. I was watching, again, names, James, is it James Smith. He's one of these YouTubers, and basically he was saying, like, for your profile, you have to have something very succinct. Uh, I've gone through very different variations of that over the years, but it was something I struggle with when somebody asks me, "What do you do?" I normally tend to go to I design edible gardens. It's not the same as I help property owners, or what you said. What you said was
Yeah,
sound a lot better.
yeah. I
Uh,
help property owners design and create uh, food producing ecosystems. Something like that. It's like it's
yeah,
not too succinct, right? Um, and because you can always you can always have follow on services, right? So ideally, what you want, I think, because you have a lot of knowledge. So ideally, what you want to do is take people on a journey where education is part of it based on what they want, right? And then we're back to like the profile of client that you'd actually be most excited to work with. So most of the clients I work with, and I think it's a huge market, they're very interested in demystifying this stuff. They're very interested in someone coming in, helping them with the initial setup, but then also coaching them and explaining to them how everything works, so that they can turn their lawn into a little micro farm and actually know how to manage it and farm it. That's been the amazing thing about our community here. Like the amount of people who now sell, my former clients who now actually sell excess produce to us so that we can put it in our store. And it's like using their own seeds. They're like, oh yeah, one of my clients just brought back these like cucumber seeds last season, and we've never grown cucumbers here. And she just arrived up to the farm the other day with a whole basket of cucumbers, being like, "Hey, I grew so many cucumbers, I don't know what to do with them. Can you put them out to sell in your farm? Yeah, in your store." I was like, "Yeah, totally." Right. So it
yeah.
is
Well,
possible.
yeah. Sorry, that will work. Because what I'm thinking of doing is doing like micro enterprises that you can do in small scale. Like I can create compost from the chickens. I can have worm. I want to sell we call it worm starter kits. So you can start with the worms and the bedding, and just demonstrate different things. I'm an engineer, so I'll be doing some like repair stuff on here as well, fixing stuff, keeping stuff in use. Just trying to get half a dozen micro enterprises on site here. They'll not make me rich, but it'll keep me going through the
It's
different
it's
seasons.
it's the circular economy model, and then there's also a lot of scope for maintenance, right? Like
Yeah.
one of my clients in the city, he went through our coaching program, so he now has a permaculture design business, and he focuses exclusively on like small urban plots. But then the follow up business that he started was he brews microorganisms, makes compost teas, and with one of these guys who does like seed trays of onions and beets and tomatoes and all the things. So he has a team, and they go around to all these little gardens. They prune the trees, they put in a load of compost, spray microorganisms, pop back in more starch, and they go and they visit each property once a week, and they just charge like a weekly fee for doing that, because he's working with kind of more high end clients, and all they want found, and again, you only find this stuff out by actually talking to people and listening to them. Um, he just found out that a lot of his clients, all they want to do is come along and pick the lettuce. They don't want to do anything else.
Hey, if you can
And
get away with it, why not?
But
Uh,
that's why it's so important to kind of like pick your demographic. And I would say, like, if I was kind of like coaching you, I would be like, just really get out and ask a lot of questions and really listen to people. It's the biggest mistake that most people make in sales. They just don't listen. They're all about like, I do this and permaculture is great for the planet and fucking blah blah blah, but they're never actually really listening to what people are saying. Um, and then they're like, oh, no one cares about permaculture, poor me. And it's like, no, you just haven't taken the time to listen to what your demographic is going through. And therefore, they're switching off when you start talking about what's important to you and not necessarily what's important to them.
Neil, we'll have to get you back on. I think there's a 3 or 4 podcasts in there for all the different things we touched on. Where do you want to tell us about the course you offer teaching this stuff, or is it a
Yes,
course or teaching
yes.
or?
So my current passion, like I said to you, is getting training permaculture designers. We've come up with a framework and a system that allows people wherever they are to find their niche and develop this irresistible offer. We take people through identifying their niche, identifying their offer, developing their first portfolio piece. So we've built a whole team that can help people to produce high quality topographic maps just using satellite information. And then we also train people to design using symbols that we've created in Canva. And then they send us those designs, which we help them to elaborate. And then our graphic design team sends them back an amazing, fully rendered digital design. And then we coach them through the best techniques in client attraction and sales so that they can take this concept and actually start making real money transforming their communities and their localities. So our goal is to train a couple of hundred people over the next couple of years, and then I'm done and I'm moving into real estate.
That's great. It sounds like a very worthwhile course, and uh, definitely would recommend somebody looking at that. And we'll put the link in the description for that.
Yeah, well, it's actually an application form, so it's not something that you can just buy online. Anyone who wants to take it, the best thing to do is to go onto our website. We have a free online training actually on there, which tells people. I just really go through the steps involved, and if you're the do-it-yourself type, I think there's all you need in that free online training to really just go and start doing it now. But then we do have an application form for people who want to join the container, and it's a combination of, we have a self-paced permaculture design and business course, which is a lot of like pre-recorded material, but we meet as a group once a month. It's a 5-month program, and we're just seeing people who go through it now launching 10, 20K a month businesses, and with having like really, really high impact as well. So that's really, really exciting to us, because I just think it's time that people get over this idea that it's like capitalism versus the planet, and if we're doing permaculture, we should kind of be poor and we should be victims and suffer. It's like, permaculturalists are solving the most pressing issues that humanity is facing right now, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be making the same kind of money that doctors and dentists and lawyers are making. That's what I think. And so if you share that belief, check us out. You can follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and we got a whole bunch of free stuff on our website. Courses on composting, gardening, and then, like I say, a free online training on how to get your profitable permaculture business off the ground. So really enjoyed talking to you, Cormac, and I look forward to continuing this relationship.
Yeah, we'll definitely get you back on roundtable, whatever, live.
Amazing, amazing.
Guys, that's been the Permaculture Vine podcast with Neal Hegarty, and we'll see you on the next one. Cheers.